So, um, imagine a leader who lies, who cheats, and just ruthlessly undermines their rivals behind closed doors.
Right, okay.
But because the company stock goes up and, the quarterly reports look fantastic, absolutely everyone calls him this moral visionary.
Yeah, it happens all the time.
It really does. And today, we're looking at why doing the quote-unquote right thing, like the just and noble thing, is often the absolute fastest way to destroy your career.
Oh, without a doubt.
And bring down your entire organization,
Right.
really. We're looking at a diagnostic landscape of leadership that, well, it completely shatters our comforting illusions about morality and success.
It is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters.
Right.
I mean, the moment you introduce competing factions, self-interest, and, the heavy burden of maintaining institutional stability,
Right.
those neat little lines we draw between good actions and good results, they just vanish entirely.
Which is exactly why we are diving into this today, because if you are listening to this, you are someone who wants to cut through the noise. You want the shortcut to being genuinely well-informed without all the fluff. You want to understand the actual levers of power that are being pulled around you every single day.
Because they are always being pulled.
Exactly. So today we are unpacking an incredibly dense, profound text about the literal mechanics of power, survival, and perception.
Yeah.
Specifically, we are exploring Niccolo Machiavelli's writings, and he's referred to as NM in the footnotes of our source material, just so you know. We're zeroing in on a highly concentrated section, chapter 19, of avoiding contempt and hatred.
And it is crucial to state right at the top what our mission is here. We are not doing some dry historical lecture on 16th century Italian politics.
No, please no.
Right. That's not the goal at all. We are treating this source material as a timeless, almost clinical manual for navigating human psychology and institutional factions.
Which is so relevant.
Exactly. The dynamics described here, the push and pull of different groups, the management of reputation, the literal physics of power, these are playing out right now in your office.
Yeah, or your local government.
Or the global stage, yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because right out of the gate, the author hits us with an idea that is, frankly, jarring to our modern idealized sensibility.
Oh, very jarring.
He asserts that a leader, a prince, will be praised by absolutely everyone as long as they simply win and maintain their state.
Right.
The argument is that if a prince wins, the means will always be judged honorable. It literally doesn't matter how you got there. If the building is still standing, everyone calls you a brilliant architect.
It is a completely unsentimental view of human nature. I mean, the core theme we are going to explore today is that leadership-like, true survival-level leadership is the ultimate tightrope walk.
Yeah.
It is about knowing exactly which factions to satisfy, knowing exactly when to be utterly ruthless, and understanding, terrifyingly enough, why doing good deeds might actually be the quickest path to ruin.
It flips everything upside down. So,
Yeah.
well, let's look at the very first trap laid out for us, the optics of power.
This is a great starting point.
The source makes this profound, almost poetic observation about human perception. It argues that men in general judge more by their eyes than by their hands.
Right.
Because everyone can see how you appear, but very few can actually touch what you are. I really want to linger on that for a second, because the physical metaphor there is just so striking.
That distinction between seeing and touching is brilliant. It really forms the foundation of, well, political epistemology. Think about the physical sensation of it.
Cool.
Sight operates at a distance, right? It is surface level. It is so easily manipulated by lighting, by framing, by the mere projection of confidence.
Like a stage play.
Exactly like a play. Touching, on the other hand, requires proximity. It requires intimacy, breaking through the barrier to feel the actual substance, the texture, the truth of the thing.
Wow, yeah.
The author is pointing out a fundamental vulnerability in human psychology. The masses, what the translation refers to as the vulgar or the generality of men, are entirely taken in by appearances and the final outcome of an event.
They just don't have the access.
Right, they don't have the access, the proximity, or honestly, perhaps the inclination to touch the complex, often ugly reality operating behind the curtain.
The text actually phrases it quite bluntly, saying that in the world there's no one but the vulgar. Like everyone's essentially operating on visual information.
Yes.
But then there's the few. The insiders, the cabinet members, the board of directors.
Yeah.
The people who actually get to touch reality. But our source claims these few don't dare oppose the opinion of the many.
Right.
Why? because the many have the majesty of the state to defend them.
Let's break down what that majesty of the state actually functions as in practice.
Yeah, please.
So if the millions of people looking from a distance decide that the leader is good and honorable because the state is secure, a consensus reality is formed.
Okay.
The handful of insiders who know the leader is actually, say, a deceitful monster, they are trapped by that consensus. They cannot speak out.
Because they sound crazy.
Precisely. If they do, they are not just arguing against a single man. They are going against the prevailing narrative, which is backed by the full weight, the institutional power, and the cultural momentum of the government.
Wow.
The few have nowhere to lean unless the masses are already wavering. If the crowd believes the illusion, the insiders are paralyzed by it.
I found the historical example provided in the footnotes so fascinating here. It mentions a quote-unquote certain prince of present times, which the notes identify as Ferdinand the Catholic.
Yes, Ferdinand is the perfect case study.
The observation is that Ferdinand never preaches anything but peace and faith, but in reality, he's intensely hostile to both.
Utterly hostile.
And here is the kicker. The argument is that if Ferdinand had actually observed peace and faith, if he had genuinely practiced what he preached, he would have had either his reputation or his state taken from him many times over.
Right.
Now, I have to push back on this a little, or at least ask you to clarify the philosophical stance here, because I'm struggling with this.
Sure, go ahead.
Isn't this just a highly intellectualized, really cynical defense of hypocrisy?
Well,
Because when I read this, I immediately thought of a modern corporate PR strategy, or even a heavily curated social media profile.
oh, absolutely.
You only ever show the outcome, right? The successful product launch, the perfect family vacation photo. You never show the messy, morally ambiguous back end.
Right, the late nights, the arguments.
Exactly. You preach transparency and teamwork while secretly plotting a hostile takeover. Is the author just telling leaders to be two-faced? Aren't you essentially building a house of cards that eventually collapses when the truth gets out?
What's fascinating here is that the author isn't interested in judging the morality of hypocrisy at all.
Really? Not at all.
No, he is stepping completely outside the bounds of traditional ethics to recognize hypocrisy as a structural institutional necessity.
Okay, well, I'm listening.
And the reason the House of Cards doesn't collapse is rooted in a specific phrase from the text. He explicitly says this applies especially to princes, where there is no court to appeal to.
No court to appeal to?
Yeah.
That changes the entire context, doesn't it?
It changes the literal physics of accountability. If you are a middle manager or a regular citizen, there is always a court above you there.
There's HR or the police.
Exactly. There are laws, human resources departments, judges, regulatory boards. If you behave ruthlessly, a higher authority will step in, adjudicate the situation, and punish you.
Make you pay the price.
Yes. So for you, moral behavior aligns with long-term survival. But if you are the absolute leader, a prince, a king, an emperor, or in a modern context, perhaps the CEO of an unregulated, monopolistic multinational, there is no higher court. If another sovereign nation attacks you, you cannot sue them for breach of contract.
You just have to fight back.
You have to survive. And in that realm of pure, unmediated survival, adhering strictly to moral virtues like peace and faith when your adversaries are playing by the rules of deceit and violence, well, that'll get you destroyed. Therefore, projecting an image of goodness while remaining fully capable of ruthlessness is not a character flaw. It is a mandatory survival mechanism.
It is the armor you wear. You appear virtuous to keep the masses calm and the state stable, but you keep your hands dirty to keep the state safe from existential threats.
Exactly.
But if appearance is literally everything, if the outcome is all that the masses care about, what are the specific appearances that a leader must avoid at absolutely all costs?
Right, the fatal flaws.
Yeah. If I am a leader building this visual facade, what cracks it? The source material is very clear that a prince must avoid anything that makes him hateful and contemptible.
Yes.
So let's delve into what we can call the twin shoals of leadership: hatred versus contempt.
The delineation between these two concepts is one of the most rigorous sociological analyses in the entire work. They are not synonyms.
They really aren't.
Being hated and being despised are entirely different psychological mechanisms, and they are triggered by entirely different administrative actions. A leader must understand the distinct anatomy of both if they want to survive.
Okay, let's break them down sequentially. First, hatred.
Okay.
The argument is that what makes a leader hated, above all else, is to be rapacious. Specifically, to be a usurper of the property and the women of his subjects.
All right.
It states quite clearly that as long as you do not take away either property or honor from the generality of men, they live contentedly. If you do that, you only have to worry about the ambition of the few, which is easy to check.
Let's look closely at the psychology of hatred as it is defined here. Hatred is an active, fiery, visceral emotion.
It burns.
It does. It requires fuel. And that fuel is personal, tangible loss. When a ruler arbitrarily steals someone's property, their livelihood, or when they violate their honor, which is represented in the 16th century context by the safety of their families and women, the ruler is striking at the very core of the subject's existence. You are taking something that is rightfully theirs, something fundamental to their identity and survival.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
This single action shifts a population from being passive, distant observers of the state into desperate, aggrieved actors.
It wakes them up. It forces them into the game.
Exactly.
And then there is contempt. The text outlines that a leader becomes contemptible when he is held to be variable, light, effeminate, pusillanimous, or irresolute.
Yes.
To avoid this, a leader has to project greatness, spiritedness, gravity, and strength. And critically, their judgments in the private concerns of subjects must be irrevocable.
Irrevocable is the key word there.
They have to maintain an opinion of themselves so formidable that no one even thinks about deceiving or maneuvering around them.
If hatred is a hot, fiery emotion, contempt is a cold one. Contempt isn't about the subjects feeling personally robbed or physically threatened. It's about the profound loss of respect.
The laws of awe.
Yes. It is looking at the leader and thinking, you are Rick. You are a joke. You are a non-entity.
Which is devastating.
When a leader is variable, meaning they change their mind constantly, or irresolute, meaning they are paralyzed by indecision, they project a massive void of authority. They broadcast to the entire world that the steering wheel is unmanned.
Oh, think about your own department or your own company right now.
Oh, we've all been there.
Right. When your manager backtracks on a promise because another department complained, or when they can't make a decision on a project's direction for 3 weeks, do you actively hate them?
Probably not.
No, you don't want to overthrow them, but you absolutely stop respecting them.
Completely.
You realize you can just wait them out or bypass them entirely.
Yeah.
So if I'm a manager, is it actually worse to be hated, or is it worse to be treated as a joke? Because that irresolute description perfectly captures a boss bleeding authority by the minute.
That loss of respect is fatal.
Yeah.
And in many ways, the text suggests it is even more insidious than hatred.
Really, more insidious.
Because contempt invites endless grinding challenges. If your judgments are not irrevocable, if you are known to fold under pressure, then every single decision you make is just the opening bid in a negotiation.
Oh, wow. People will just constantly test the fences.
They will test the fences every single day. They will try to maneuver around you. You'll spend all your energy just trying to enforce basic compliance.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. But let's extrapolate on why interfering with property and honor is the absolute red line that creates the hotter emotion of hatred.
Yes, I really want to dig into that. Why is property the ultimate trigger? Why not taxation or harsh laws?
Because it disrupts the foundational social contract between the ruler and the ruled.
Okay, how so?
The vast majority of people, the generality of men, do not want to rule. They are not consumed by the burning ambition to sit on the throne or sit in the CEO's chair.
They just want to grill on the weekends.
Exactly. They just want to live their lives, enjoy the fruits of their labor, and maintain their dignity. If you leave those basic things alone, the masses are inherently conservative. They actively want to preserve the status quo because the status quo is keeping them safe.
That makes sense.
But the moment you start arbitrary confiscations, you shatter that safety. You force them into violent opposition. You manufacture massive armies of enemies out of people who are perfectly happy to ignore your existence.
Wow.
If you respect property and honor, you only have to fight the ambition of the handful of elites who actually want your job. But if you make the masses hate you, your foundation turns to sand.
So what happens when a leader fails this test? What happens when you alienate the masses and that active hatred takes root?
Well, internal threats arise.
Right. Our source material spends a significant amount of time detailing the ultimate internal threat, the conspiracy. So let's look at the anatomy of a conspiracy and what acts as the ultimate armor against it.
Any leader faces a duality of fear. There are fears from the outside, on account of external powers and foreign enemies, and fears from within on account of his own subjects.
External fears are somewhat straightforward, right? You handle them by having good arms and good friends.
Exact.
Meaning, if you have a strong military apparatus, you'll naturally attract reliable allies. But internally, Things will only remain steady as long as you aren't disturbed by a conspiracy.
Right.
And what's brilliant is the almost mathematical breakdown of why conspiracies rarely succeed if the people are satisfied.
It is a phenomenal psychological analysis of how a plot actually functions in reality. To execute a conspirator cannot act alone.
They need help.
They need company, they need accomplices. But they can only recruit from a very specific pool of people, those they believe to be malcontents, individuals who are deeply unhappy with the current ruler.
But here is the fatal structural flaw in the conspirator's plan.
Yeah.
The moment you disclose your intent to assassinate the leader to one of these malcontents, you hand them the exact material they need to become perfectly content.
It's brilliant.
Because that malcontent can immediately turn around, betray your plot to the prince, and reap a massive reward. You are basically handing them a winning lottery ticket.
Exactly. Let's weigh the psychological asymmetry of that situation. Imagine the scales of a balance.
Okay.
On the side of the conspirator, what do you have? You have terror, you have paranoia, you have jealousy, and you have the looming anticipation of a brutal, torturous punishment if you are caught.
Awful.
Imagine the late-night anxiety of knowing your life rests in the hands of someone who could sell you out at any second. That is a heavy, dark, psychological burden to carry.
Yeah. Nobody wants that.
Now look at the other side, the prince's side. The prince has the majesty of the principality, the established laws, the protection of friends, and the overwhelming defense of the state machinery.
It is totally lopsided. The conspirator is risking their life, their family's lives, everything, for a dubious gain. While betraying the conspiracy offers a sure gain, the math just doesn't work in the conspirator's favor.
But the crucial element, the variable that makes a conspiracy practically impossible, according to the author, is the goodwill of the people.
Ah, right.
Because even if a conspirator somehow manages to keep the secret, even if they perfectly execute the evil deed and kill the prince, if the people loved that prince, the conspirator has gained absolutely nothing.
Because they have to deal with the fallout.
Yes. They have to fear the wrath of the masses after the deed is done, leaving them absolutely no refuge.
And this isn't just theory. There is a wild, incredibly cinematic historical example provided in the text.
Oh, this story is amazing.
It's the story of Messer Annibale Bentivoglio, who was the prince in Bologna. He gets assassinated by a rival family, the Canesi. They successfully execute the conspiracy.
They pulled it off.
The prince is dead. The only surviving heir to the Bentivoglio line is a literal baby, Messer Giovanni, who is in swaddling clothes. The Canesi must have looked around and thought, you know, we did it. We won. The state is ours.
But they miscalculated the single most important variable in the Machiavellian equation.
They completely ignored the masses. Because immediately after the homicide, the people of Bologna rose up in absolute fury and killed all the Canesi.
Every last one of them.
Every single one. The popular goodwill toward the House of Bentivoglio was so immense that it triggered a spontaneous, bloody purge. But the story gets even crazier.
It really does.
Because the only heir is a baby, the people of Bologna realize they have no one to actually run the machinery of the state. So they hear a rumor.
Right.
They hear that there was someone living in Florence who has Bentivoglio blood, even though everyone thought he was just the son of a common blacksmith.
A blacksmith.
The people of Bologna literally travel to Florence, find this blacksmith's son, bring him back, and give him the government of their city to run until the baby Giovanni comes of age.
It's unbelievable.
That is the sheer, undeniable power of popular goodwill. It transcends death. It transcends logic and class structures. They put a blacksmith's son in charge just to keep the brand alive.
It is a phenomenal illustration of the core principle. The Canesi solved the mechanical problem of assassinating the prince. They had the weapons, the timing, the access.
Yeah.
But they fundamentally failed to solve the political problem of the people's love. They created a power vacuum that the people immediately filled with vengeance.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me, though. Relying on the goodwill of the people sounds a bit soft, doesn't it?
What do you mean?
Well, if I'm a calculating leader, a pragmatist, it sounds a lot like relying on thoughts and prayers. I can't just mandate that people love me. If generating goodwill isn't just about having a charismatic personality, how do you practically institutionally engineer it?
You asked the exact right question. Relying purely on personality or charm to generate goodwill is incredibly dangerous.
That's exhausting.
Utterly exhausting. Personalities falter. Charm fades. What you need are permanent institutions.
Right.
You need structures that act as shock absorbers between you and the inevitable resentments that come from governing. You have to engineer the goodwill into the system itself.
Which brings us to the genius of delegation and institutional meat shields. The source material points to the Kingdom of France, and the footnotes highlight Louis IX as a model of brilliant governance due to the invention of a very specific institution, the Parliament.
Now, we need to carefully define what a parliament means in this specific historical context.
Right, it's not what we think of today.
No, it is not a modern democratic legislature where elected officials debate laws. In the French monarchy of this era, the parliaments were incredibly powerful judicial bodies, supreme law courts.
Okay.
And the genius of whoever founded this system was in recognizing a permanent, irresolvable structural conflict within any human society.
The conflict is laid out perfectly. On one side, you have the ambition and the insolence of the powerful, the great nobles, the wealthy elites, the aristocrats. Yeah. On the other side, you have the fear and the hatred of the generality of people toward those powerful elites. The elites possess a structural desire to oppress and extract wealth. The people possess a desperate desire not to be oppressed.
It is a zero-sum game. If the king steps in directly to mediate every single land dispute or tax grievance, he is guaranteed to make someone angry.
There's no winning.
Exactly. If he sides with the peasants, the powerful, heavily armed nobles will hate him and plot to overthrow him. If he sides with the nobles, the masses will hate him and eventually revolt. The king's personal political capital is depleted with every single ruling he makes.
So what does a brilliant king do? He institutes a third judge, the Parliament.
Yes.
This body is explicitly created to beat down the great and favor the lesser side, but critically, without any blame falling on the king.
It is the ultimate political meat shield.
Meat shield, I love that term.
It's exactly what it is. The parliament absorbs all the societal friction. When a powerful noble is heavily fined or stripped of his ancestral lands for abusing his peasants, the noble curses the judges of the parliament.
Not the king.
Right. He directs his hatred at the institution, not the monarch. The king remains perpetually above the fray, appearing only as a benevolent, untouchable figurehead.
The rule derived from this is so profound, and it translates immediately to modern life. It says, princes should have anything blamable administered by others, favors by themselves.
Yes.
I read this, and my mind went straight to modern corporate structures. Think about a CEO who realizes the company is bloated and needs to downsize by 20%.
A classic scenario.
If that CEO walks desk to desk, handing out pink slips and firing people, they become the literal face of ruin. They absorb all the hatred.
Which completely destroys their ability to lead the remaining 80% of the employees. The survivors will view the CEO with deep suspicion and fear.
Exactly. So what do? They hire a ruthless outside consulting firm?
Oh, the consultants.
Right. The consultants come in, they run the cold, calculated efficiency analyses, they draw up the termination lists. Or the CEO empowers a very strict bureaucratic human resources department to enforce all the universally despised policies. The return to office mandates, the travel budget cuts, the new dress codes.
Yes, the classic HR blame game.
The employees direct all their venom at the consultants or at HR. It becomes this faceless entity to hate.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the CEO is the one who personally sends out the company-wide email announcing the unexpected holiday bonuses or the new half-day Friday policy.
Favors by themselves. It is a structural necessity for maintaining authority and goodwill. If you are a leader listening to this, whether you run a team of 5 or a company of 5,000, you must ask yourself, who is acting as your parliament?
Ooh, that's a great question.
Who is absorbing the blame for the necessary, painful decisions in your organization? If the answer is no one, if you are delivering every single piece of bad news yourself out of some misguided modern sense of total transparency or taking extreme ownership, you are likely eroding your own power base. You are accumulating the kind of active hatred and cold contempt that we discussed earlier.
That is such a vital takeaway. You have to set up a third judge.
Okay.
But as we move forward in the analysis, we run into a terrifying historical reality.
And we do.
It is relatively easy to balance the people and the nobles when you have a neat, well-ordered kingdom like France with a functional parliament. But what if the system isn't neat?
Right.
What happens when you introduce a massive, heavily armed, and incredibly greedy third faction into the mix?
This is where the analysis pivots from elegant political theory into a brutal historical autopsy. The author shifts his focus to the Roman Empire.
Yes, specifically examining a string of emperors from Marcus Aurelius down to Maximinus.
He notes that unlike other principalities that only had to balance the ambition of the elites with the desires of the masses, the Roman emperors faced a unique third difficulty.
The cruelty and avarice of the soldiers, the military faction, and the desires of these factions were fundamentally incompatible.
Completely incompatible.
The people loved quiet. They wanted peace to conduct trade and raise their families. Therefore, they loved modest, peaceful princes.
Right.
But the soldiers loved a prince with a fierce military spirit. They wanted a leader who was insolent, cruel, and rapacious. Why? So the prince could constantly go to war, double their pay, and allow them to vent their greed and cruelty on the conquered people.
It is an impossible, mathematically unsolvable contradiction. You cannot satisfy both.
You just can't.
If you try to be modest, just, peaceful, the army will despise you. They will view you as weak, and they will likely kill you because you aren't providing them with the plunder they feel entitled to.
Yeah.
Conversely, if you are rapacious and cruel to satisfy the army's greed, the people will hate you, the economy will collapse, and the citizens will rebel.
It's a lose-lose scenario. And most new emperors, recognizing they couldn't avoid being hated by someone, realized they had to make a brutal calculation.
That to choose a side.
They had to align with the most powerful community. In Rome, that undeniably meant the military. They had to satisfy the soldiers, often at the absolute catastrophic expense of the everyday people.
Let's look closely at the specific case studies provided of emperors who tried to go against this grain, who tried to be genuinely good, moral men in a fundamentally corrupt system.
Okay, Pertinax and Alexander.
Yes. Both of these men are described as living modest lives, being lovers of justice, enemies of cruelty, humane, and kind.
And both came to incredibly violent, tragic ends.
Let's start with Pertinax.
Right. Look at Pertinax. He takes over after Commodus.
Mm-hmm.
The soldiers under Commodus were used to living in total license, doing whatever they wanted, taking whatever they wanted without consequence.
Just absolute chaos.
Pertinax comes into power and tries to force them back to a decent, disciplined military life. The result: he was ruined in the first beginnings of his administration.
Instantly.
He generated active hatred because he took away their license to plunder, and he added contempt because he was an old man. He was assassinated almost immediately.
Now look at Alexander. The historical record here is astounding. Alexander was of such goodness that in the 14 years he held the empire, no one was ever put to death by him without a fair trial.
14 years.
14 years of strict justice and due process at the height of the Roman Empire.
Which is an unimaginable achievement. You would think he would go down in history as a legendary, universally beloved hero.
He really would.
But what actually happens, wait, let me get this straight. Alexander is completely just doesn't execute anyone unfairly, brings the rule of law back to Rome, and he still gets murdered.
He does.
How?
Because in the eyes of the legions, his justice looked like weakness. He was deemed effeminate, which in the Roman military context was a highly specific political critique implying he lacked martial vigor and was supposedly controlled by his mother, Julia Mamaea.
Oh, so contempt.
Exactly. Because of this perception, he became utterly despised by the army. The military conspired against him and butchered him. He successfully avoided the hatred of the people, but he succumbed entirely to the contempt of the soldiers. And this leads to the most chilling, counterintuitive lesson in the entire analysis.
If we connect this to the bigger picture.
Yes. The underlying thesis here is devastating to our moral sensibilities. The author explicitly concludes that hatred is acquired through good deeds just as easily as through bad ones.
Let that sink in.
From childhood, we are taught that doing good yields good results. But the argument here is that if a leader wants to maintain his state, he is often forced not to be good.
Right.
Because when the community you rely on to maintain your power is inherently corrupt, whether that's a greedy populace, ambitious elites, or in this case, the bloodthirsty Roman soldiers, you must follow their humor to satisfy them.
You have to play their game.
If your power base is corrupt, good deeds are your literal enemy. Doing the right, moral, just thing will get you killed.
That is so profoundly dark. But when you look at the mechanics, you see the absolute airtight logic of it.
You do.
Let's bring it back to the modern world. Imagine you are hired as the CEO of a company that only survives and turns a massive profit by, say, exploiting major environmental regulatory loopholes.
Okay, a great modern equivalent.
That is the corrupt foundation of their wealth.
Yeah.
If you come in with a strong moral compass and try to clean up their act, implement green initiatives, and operate ethically, the board of directors and the shareholders who rely on those massive profit margins are going to fire you by the end of the week.
Absolutely.
Your good deeds are actively destroying their wealth.
Oh.
So if being a good, just ruler like Alexander gets you murdered by your own army, and being a strict disciplinarian like Pertinax gets you murdered by your own army, how on earth do you survive as a new prince in a corrupted system?
You have to become something else entirely. You have to transcend the simple binary of good and bad, or modest and cruel. You must become a terrifying, perfectly calibrated blend of deception and force. You have to embody both the fox and the lion. Which brings us to the ultimate model for a new prince navigating treacherous waters. Emperor Severus.
The masterclass of Severus. Our source material presents Severus as having an overwhelming amount of virtue. And we should clarify immediately for the listener, virtue in the Machiavellian sense does not mean moral goodness or piety.
No, absolutely.
It means virtue, sheer effectiveness, power, capability, and partial prowess.
Yeah.
Severus had so much of this capability that he managed an impossible balancing act. He kept the soldiers incredibly friendly while heavily overburdening the people with taxes, and yet he still ruled his entire life happily.
It seems like a paradox based on the rules we just established.
Yeah.
How did he oppress the people without being destroyed by their resultant hatred? The analysis reveals that his virtues made him so incredibly admirable, so larger than life, that the people remained astonished and stupefied. While the soldiers were reverent and satisfied, he literally overwhelmed the population's capacity to hate him with the sheer scale of his competence.
I absolutely love how the source breaks down his tactical genius. It is like watching a grandmaster play three-dimensional chess while his opponents are playing checkers.
It really is. Let's walk through it.
Here is the step-by-step of how Severus played the fox and the lion. He is a military captain stationed in Slavonia. The emperor in Rome, Pertinax, gets murdered by the Praetorian Guard. The new emperor, Julianus, is weak and indolent.
The perfect target.
Severus sees his opening. He convinces his army that they need to march on Rome, not to seize power, but righteously to avenge the murdered Pertinax. He completely conceals his own ambition.
The fox at work.
He moves his army so incredibly fast that he is in Italy before anyone even knows he's left his post. He arrives in Rome. The Senate is absolutely terrified of his army. They elect him emperor out of pure fear, and Julianus is killed.
That is a brilliant opening move. He uses a noble pretext to achieve a ruthless goal. But he is still not secure. He now faces two massive rivals commanding other formidable armies.
Right, Niger and Albinus.
Pescennius Niger in the east, in Asia, and Albinus in the west. He knows he cannot fight a two-front war against both of them simultaneously.
So cue the fox. He decides to use pure deception against Albinus in the west. He writes a letter to Albinus and says, "Hey, the Senate just made me emperor, but I don't want to hold this immense burden alone.
Oh, this part is so devious.
I want to share this dignity with you. You can have the title of Caesar, we'll be colleagues, we'll rule together." And Albinus buys it completely. He accepts it as true and stays pacified in the west.
With his western flank secured by a lie, Severus seamlessly transitions into the lion. He turns his entire military might east, attacks Niger, violently defeats him, and kills him. The eastern threat is entirely neutralized.
Then comes the ultimate, breathtaking betrayal. He returns to Rome, goes before the Senate, and falsely complains that Albinus, the man he just elevated to his colleague, was ungrateful and had secretly sent assassins to kill him.
He feigns outrage.
He says, "I have to go punish this ingratitude to protect the empire." He marches his battle-hardened army to France, attacks Albinus, and strips him of both his state and his life.
The author summarizes this sequence perfectly. Whoever examines this man's actions will find him a very fierce lion and a very astute fox.
It's unbelievable.
He was feared and revered by absolutely everyone, and crucially, he was not hated by the army. He survived because he understood exactly when to deploy deception and when to deploy overwhelming violence.
When I read this breakdown, my mind went straight back to Wall Street.
Oh, yeah.
Think of a ruthless corporate raider, a tightened industry who comes into a chaotic market, orchestrates a staggeringly complex hostile takeover, pits rival firms against each other with false promises of mergers, and then systematically eliminates them one by one.
A perfect parallel.
And even the employees who were losing out in this scenario, the people who were being overburdened by layoffs and restructuring, they are so incredibly astonished by the sheer audacity, the terrifying competence of the strategy, that they can't even organize a coherent resistance. They are, as the text says, stupefied.
Stupefied.
His immense, almost mythological reputation acts as a force field against the hatred his robbery should have logically generated.
It is a brilliant analogy, but we must highlight a massive caveat here. Severus pulled this off because of his extraordinary singular personal abilities.
Right.
He possessed a once-in-a-generation blend of fierce military prowess and chillingly cunning intellect. The profound danger arises when lesser men, or men who lack that precise, delicate balance, try to wield absolute power using only half of the equation.
Which perfectly sets up the downfall of cruelty and baseness.
Yeah.
The source material examines the successors who tried to imitate Severus, but failed catastrophically because they lacked his nuance.
Right.
Let's start with Caracalla, who's actually Severus's own son.
Caracalla inherited some of his father's martial traits. He was a fierce military man, fiercely capable of enduring any trouble, disdainful of delicate food, and willing to sleep on the ground with his troops.
A real soldier's.
He was a pure, unadulterated soldier, and because of this, the armies initially loved him. But he completely lacked his father's astuteness, the fox.
Right.
Without the fox, his ferocity devolved into unimaginable, unchecked, sadistic cruelty.
Unimaginable is exactly the right word. The historical record indicates that after committing infinite individual killings of rivals and perceived enemies, he unleashed his wrath on the masses.
It was a bloodbath.
He put to death a great part of the people of Rome and absolutely all the people of Alexandria. He slaughtered thousands upon thousands. Through this unrestrained bloodshed, he became, quote, most hateful to all the world.
He generated such an overwhelming tidal wave of hatred that it breached the walls of his own palace. He began to be deeply feared even by the men standing closest to him.
Which is so dangerous.
And this leads to the exact mechanism of his death, which is one of the most instructive cautionary tales in the entire analysis. Caracalla, the emperor of the known world, was murdered by a lowly centurion in his own army, right in the midst of his own troops.
And specific details of why this centurion killed him are just mind-blowing in their stupidity.
You really are.
The records show that Caracalla had previously executed this specific centurion's brother, adding intense disgrace to the killing. Then Caracalla proceeded to threaten the centurion himself with death every single day.
Every single day.
He constantly reminded the man that his life was forfeit. And yet, despite killing this man's brother and promising to kill him next, Caracalla kept the centurion employed in his personal, intimate bodyguard.
The author diagnoses this as a rash policy likely to bring ruin. I mean, it is the ultimate masterclass in the physics of power and human desperation.
Seriously.
Caracalla pushed a human being past the psychological breaking point of caring about his own survival. He manufactured what the text calls an obstinate spirit.
So what does this all mean? I have to stop and marvel at Caracalla's blinding hubris here.
Yeah, it's hard to fathom.
It's like a CEO firing a key employee's spouse, threatening to fire the employee every single morning in front of the whole office, completely destroying their dignity, but still insisting that this deeply traumatized, furious person act as their personal chauffeur every night.
Exactly.
You are literally putting the keys to your life in the hands of someone who has nothing left to lose. It is the definition of an unforced error.
It speaks to a profound, inescapable truth about human nature and violence. The author explicitly warns leaders, deaths resulting from an obstinate spirit, meaning an individual who has resolved to die and no longer fears the consequences of their actions, cannot be prevented by any prince, no matter how heavily guarded they are.
Wow.
If someone truly does not fear death, they hold the power to kill you. Caracalla manufactured an obstinate spirit through his own sadistic cruelty, and then he kept that spirit within striking distance.
It's incredibly foolish.
The only defense the author advises is to completely avoid deeply injuring those who are in your immediate service. You cannot humiliate the people holding the swords.
It's an incredible lesson in restraint. The text then briefly touches on two other failures, Commodus and Maximinus, who fail for entirely different reasons.
Right.
Commodus inherited the empire from his father, Marcus Aurelius. He had it incredibly easy. He just had to follow his father's peaceful footsteps. But Commodus possessed a cruel and bestial spirit.
Yes.
He indulged the armies, allowing them to practice rapacity on the people, so he earned the hatred of the masses. But far worse, he generated fatal contempt. He constantly descended into the amphitheaters to fight gladiators.
Theatrical nonsense.
He behaved in ways that were base, theatrical, and entirely unworthy of the imperial majesty. He wasn't just hated, he was despised as a clown.
And then you have Maximinus. Maximinus was elected by the army because he was a fiercely warlike man, perfect for a time of conflict. But he was ruined by two distinct factors. First, his extreme cruelty. He delayed his arrival in Rome to take the throne, while allowing his prefects to ravage the empire with harsh laws and confiscations. But second, and fascinatingly from a sociological perspective, he was ruined by his baseness.
His background.
Right. Maximinus was formerly a sheep herder in Thrace. This fact was widely known across the empire, and it brought universal disdain. The aristocratic senate, the people, and eventually the army viewed him as too low class, too unrefined to hold the majesty of the Roman Empire. The entire world rebelled against him out of a toxic mixture of indignation and fear.
So all of these Roman examples, Severus, Caracalla, Commodus, Maximinus, they perfectly illustrate what happens when the military, the armed faction, is the absolute dominant force in a society.
They were trapped.
The emperors were completely trapped by the desires of the soldiers. But then the author does something brilliant. He zooms out from ancient history and looks at the modern structural landscape. He notes a massive shift in how power is distributed in his own time.
Yes, he transitions to examining the princes of our times. And he concludes that modern rulers actually have less of this specific, terrifying difficulty of having to satisfy the soldiers by extraordinary, ruinous means.
Oh, really? Why is that?
Because the foundational, structural reality of the state has evolved.
And the reason is fascinating. It's because modern armies, unlike the Roman legions, aren't deeply entrenched in the actual government and daily administration of the provinces.
Exactly.
The Roman armies practically ran the empire. They were the bureaucracy. Modern armies are separate. Therefore, the conclusion is that today, it is more necessary for a leader to satisfy the people than the soldiers, because the people can ultimately do more. The balance of leverage has shifted from the military to the populace.
However, he notes two major contemporary exceptions to this new rule, which proves he is looking at the actual mechanics of states, not just theorizing.
Right, the exceptions.
He points to the Turk, referring to the Ottoman Sultan, Selim I, and the Sultan of Egypt, the head of the Mamluk Empire.
Right, because these specific rulers still keep massive, permanent standing armies right by their side. The text notes, the Turk keeps 12,000 infantry and 15,000 horsemen.
A massive force.
The very security of their kingdoms depends entirely on keeping these armies happy. So for them, the old Roman rules completely apply. They must put off every other regard, ignore the desires of the people, and keep the soldiers as their primary friends.
But the analysis of the Sultan's state in Egypt is where we get a masterclass in institutional design. It is structurally unique. The author compares the Mamluk Sultanate to the Christian pontificate, the papacy. It is neither a traditional hereditary principality where power automatically passes from father to son through blood, nor is it a truly new principality where a conqueror arrives with an army.
Because the heirs to the Sultanate aren't the sons of the old prince. The new leader is elected to the rank by a specific council of elites who have the authority to choose. But here is the absolute magic trick of this system. The author points out that because the institutions themselves, the ancient orders of the state, are so old and deeply established, they receive this newly elected leader exactly as if he were their hereditary lord.
It's seamless.
It instantly removes all the friction, the instability, and the challenges to authority that a normal new prince would inevitably face.
That institutional nuance is so important.
I love this concept. It translates perfectly to a massive legacy corporation today. Think of a company with an incredibly strong, deeply entrenched corporate culture, a 100-year-old bank, for example.
Sure.
It almost doesn't matter if the new CEO is an outside hire, someone totally new to the building. The bureaucratic machine, the ancient orders of the company, just absorb them.
Right, the system takes over.
The compliance departments, the middle managers, the protocols, they all run on autopilot. And the new leader is treated with the exact same deference as the founder, simply because they now occupy the chair. The system is vastly stronger than the individual.
That is the perfect modern equivalent. The structure itself neutralizes the vulnerability of a leadership transition. Which brings us to the culmination of all this profound analysis.
Yeah, let's tie it all together.
We've looked at incredibly varied historical examples. We've seen the hereditary Marcus Aurelius ruling through justice. We've seen the elected sultan relying on ancient orders. We've seen the weak Commodus destroyed by contempt, and the self-made, awe-inspiring Severus surviving through cunning and force.
So many different paths.
So, what is the ultimate playbook? If you are a leader today trying to navigate your own treacherous waters, who do you copy?
This brings us to the ultimate synthesis: founding versus conserving. The author concludes that it is useless and actually actively harmful for a new prince to just blindly imitate Marcus Aurelius or to blindly imitate Severus.
Exactly, because context is everything. If you try to imitate Marcus Aurelius, who ruled by unshakable hereditary right and focused his energy on justice, philosophy, and modesty, while you are in the chaotic phase of trying to establish a new state, you will be crushed.
Right, the wolves will eat you.
You will be destroyed by ambitious factions who do not respect your authority yet. Conversely, if you imitate Severus, the ruthless, deceptive fox and lion, when you don't possess his immense freakish level of personal capability, or worse, if you applied his brutal ruthlessness to a state that is already stable and peaceful, you will just generate catastrophic hatred and be murdered by your own people.
Exactly like Caracalla.
Yes.
So what is the actual synthesis? How do you blend them?
The author synthesizes the lessons brilliantly. A new leader cannot rely on just one static model of behavior. You must be fluid. You must take from Severus the exact parts necessary to found your state.
The aggressive phase.
In the beginning, you need the ruthlessness, the cunning deception of the fox, the awe-inspiring, violent action of the lion to establish your unquestioned authority and secure your foundation. But once the state is established, once it is firm and your enemies are subdued, you must pivot completely.
A total 180.
You must take from Marcus the parts that are fitting and glorious to conserve a state. You must transition your persona toward justice, modesty, and the careful balancing of factions.
I cannot stress enough how perfectly this maps to the life cycle of a business.
Oh, completely.
The mindset and the tactics needed to take a startup from 0 to 1 are fundamentally different from the tactics needed to run it 10 years later. The founder who breaks all the rules, disrupts industries, steps on toes, and acts like a ruthless Severus to get the company off the ground.
Yeah.
If that exact same person tries to use those exact same aggressive tactics to manage a mature, stable Fortune 500 company, they will destroy it from the inside out. They will alienate their own board, they will get sued by regulators, and they will cause a mass exodus of their best employees. Applying the wrong skill set to the wrong phase of power leads to absolute ruin.
Spot on. Recognizing exactly which phase of power you are in and accurately identifying which faction currently holds the leverage in your specific environment is the true mark of Machiavellian brilliance. It is situational awareness elevated to a high-stakes survival art.
This has been an unbelievable perspective-shifting journey through the actual mechanics of power. We started by looking at how power is inherently visual and deceptive, how the vulgar judge only by their eyes, and why leaders are structurally forced by the lack of a higher court to manage appearances over reality.
You did.
We examined the twin, deadly dangers of hatred, born from stealing a person's property and honor, versus contempt, born from projecting weakness, variability, and indecision.
We saw the mathematical asymmetry of conspiracies and why the deep goodwill of the people is the ultimate, impenetrable armor against betrayal.
And the French Parlement?
Yes. We explored the genius of institutional meat shields, like the French Parlement, absorbing the blame of the masses so the leader doesn't have to deplete their own political capital.
And then we walked through the terrifying Roman crucible, realizing the dark truth that when the system you operate in is corrupt, your own good deeds can literally get you killed. We saw Severus master the fox and the lion to survive impossible odds, and we saw Caracalla succumb to blinding hubris by keeping a man who no longer feared death as his personal bodyguard.
An obstinate spirit.
All of this leads to the final realization that true leadership requires adapting your very nature to the phase of the institution founding with the ferocity of Severus and conserving with the justice of Marcus.
I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over as you go back out into your own world. We discussed how the source warns that you can be ruined by doing good deeds if the system you exist in is corrupt.
Right.
Look closely at the organizations, the communities, or the industries you are a part of today. Are you frustrating yourself or perhaps even endangering your own career By trying to play the part of the just, transparent, and noble Marcus Aurelius in an environment that currently demands the cunning and ruthlessness of Severus.
That's a heavy question.
Or, conversely, and perhaps much more commonly in modern management, are you alienating everyone around you by acting like a ruthless Severus when the foundation is already built, the company is stable, and your team just desperately needs you to conserve it like Marcus?
Remember where we started this conversation? That naive expectation of clear moral geometry. The comforting idea that being good always, predictably yield good. What we've learned today is that sometimes the moral X-ray machine is broken for a very specific structural reason.
It really is.
Sometimes you have to navigate the muddy waters by seeing the factions for what they actually are, not what you wish they were. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the real, unfiltered mechanics of power. Keep questioning the appearances around you, and we'll see you next time.